On today's show, we are still overcoming heartbreak here on the Locked On Padres podcast, but we got to talk about what are the things to look forward to, what are the things to keep an eye on this offseason, a little bit of a primer for you guys for what to look at, what checkpoints throughout the offseason over these very long months ahead. Going to talk about that and a bunch more. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Tuesday, October 15th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You may be familiar with my baseball-related work over at Just Baseball. Go check out that website where I will be writing more and more as we are officially in the offseason, no more Padres baseball and whatnot, obviously, so go check that out, and also check out my other podcast if you don't want Padres talk, because perhaps it, hits a little bit too close to home. Maybe it's a little bit too triggering for you right now, given the last, week or so, I guess. Go check out Baseball versus the World, my other podcast. You can also follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiiipeno, or at LO_Padres. I don't know why I phrased it like that. Today's episode, guys, we are talking about the offseason and just like in a general sense of like what are the things as of right now that I came up with that I think are the biggest storylines for this team. And it's really fun because, well, I think that there are other teams and other times, even with the Padres, but this is always usually a team that you can kind of look forward to, not just the trade deadline, not just free agency, but like just the entirety of any break of sorts. Because that's because of AJ Preller and the new ownership group. So it makes it that it's never a boring offseason. You're never going into it as a Padres fan. And this is one of the things I talked about yesterday, is that you never go into the offseason being like, yep, hopefully we get Rhys Hoskins. Like, that's your ultimate dream, and that's it. No, you're like, oh, God, we traded Michael Keg for ostensibly 2 amazing pitchers. Oh, my God, we signed Xander Bogaerts. Oh, my Lord, we just did this. Oh, man, Jackson Merrill's going to be the opening day center fielder. All that sort of stuff. It's really exciting being a Padres fan during this time. So keep your head up. We got some things to talk about. Today's episode, guys, though, is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Go check that out, guys. Let us begin, folks. Let us begin. All right. Without further ado, I will say, first of all, these things are going to change over time, and also we will be doing, of course, updates and reactions to any news that comes out. I've said this on yesterday's show, probably not going to be talking about any of the divisional rounds too much. Maybe I will. I might do a crossover with someone else. My guy Miller Thomas of Locked On D-backs might go over some things, might give World Series predictions, or maybe give some awards for the entire season, stuff like that. But all in all, going to try and pretend that baseball doesn't exist for a little bit. The first thing I want to point out for the Padres offseason, a big question that we got to look forward to and ask, is who will be my little toy mascot on my screen for the video viewers instead of Pikachu. Of course, I'm kidding, guys. But in all seriousness, fun fact, I think I'm going to start replacing him because we are no longer in our Sage superpowered mode, given the elimination. So probably going to find different guys around my house, little totems to put on this. Tatis will always stay here. He's always going to be here, always, as we all know. But maybe we'll change that. So that's another thing. That's one thing you guys have to look forward to for all my video listeners. But in all seriousness, the first thing I want to talk about, and I think that this is really just covers everything, but we know that the Padres ownership, we know that with Peter Seidler and AJ Preller and whatnot, that a lot of money, they have not been shy about this, but just how much is going to be available. Because in fairness, last offseason, the big problem was that we knew, they're not going to be able to keep Juan Soto because of the arbitration number going up to about $30 million a year, and they are already over the luxury tax for the second year in a row. So it kind of felt like it, no more Peter Seidler. It seemed like ownership made its wishes very clear. But following the success of this season, following the breaking, record-breaking attendance of this season, following just the overall good vibes of this season, I would be very surprised if there wasn't at least some sort of money thrown around. And frankly, this is the Padres are in a team where I just don't think that it would actually be possible for them to almost at least not somewhat spend in some way, because they have so many players that are signed on this team long term, from Tatis and Machado and Cronenworth and Darvish and Musgrove and Bogaerts and whoever, right? Like, they have a lot of guys on this team for a while, so you kind of have no, you kind of are in a position where you kind of have to compete and try. So that's the good thing. But just how much? That is still a question, right? It's still fair to ask with the new ownership group and what have you, with no more Peter Seidler. R.I.P. Rest in peace. What is it going to look like exactly? Are they going to go like super bananas? Right? Are they going to be like crazy the way that they were two off seasons ago? And it didn't necessarily age well, but I'm saying, when they signed Bogaerts, when they did that, because there is a really interesting free agent class this summer. So I'm really curious to see just how much. Is it going to be more like last season, or is it going to be more like that 2022 offseason? I would wager that it's somewhere in the middle, where there's definitely some middle ground top tier free agents that they can go after. But I wouldn't say that the Juan Soto, type of package is available. I don't think anyone was expecting that in the first place. I don't think any of you were expecting that in the first place. But I don't think anything like that, right? And I don't think that the Padres need to, which is the good news. So, in fact, that's really exciting. This is not a team that they have to go out, say they're not the, I don't know. They're not the who's a somewhat competitive team that needs to spend. The D-backs, maybe? The Giants? I don't know. Like, they don't have to go out and make giant splashes, but they can definitely go out and get some middle tier free agents. And there's a lot of them. And we talked about this last year, actually. One of the reasons why I was so insistent on not giving up too much farm system stuff, not over committing to any of the free agents that were available last year, was because I felt this is a really big, strong, kind of free agent class upcoming. So you actually have some options and some possibilities to improve the team. And given that this team won, 92 games this year, like, it's still possible for them to be just as good as last year, if not better, heading into this next season. So that is a big thing, though. Just how much is available to spend. That kind of governs everything, frankly. And of course, my little Pikachu, who am I going to replace him with? That is another big question. The next thing that we got to talk about, obviously, is who is going to replace Joe Musgrove. That is probably outside, just exactly how much money is going to be available. And I'm assuming that there will be a decent amount of bread, of moolah to go around. But the other big question is still Joe Musgrove, because without Joe Musgrove, in my opinion, this team is definitely going to be in the starting pitching market. And don't get me wrong, I don't think they're at like a code red. Dylan Cease and Michael King at the very minimum are very solid pieces, and then you can hopefully hope on Yu Darvish still being a productive starter, although maybe not as healthy. But then after that, it gets a little bit shaky, especially with the departures of your Dylan Lesko, of your Robbie Snelling, of your top pitching prospects. So, and not to mention when they lost Gore in the Juan Soto trade. So there has to be some sort of plan to acquire starting pitching, or at the very minimum, an extension coming in for a Cease or a King. And that's going to be a big question, guys. But in terms of who could replace Joe Musgrove and kind of what the free agency class looks like, we got to talk about that, guys, because it's oh so nice. I've talked about it a lot, and we will, of course, talk about it here on this podcast, guys. But first, I must take a second to talk to you about the title sponsor of this podcast, and that is our good friends over at Game Time. Here is the thing. MLB playoffs. They're super exciting. They're super fantastic. And if you want to attend a game, it's a great place to go check that out. It's Game Time, the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball that makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. So say you don't realize you're going to be free, right? Say you're out to a happy hour with your coworkers or with your friends, and you're like, we're gonna actually head home early, and you're like, oh, cool, you know what? Let's go hit a game. And you're just walking out of the place. You're walking down to the Bronx for Game 3 of the ALCS or something like that. You can do that at Game Time. The prices will go down. They've got all sorts of deals, zone deals, flash deals. They have different seat views when you're actually buying the ticket, so you let know. Lowest price is guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. It's great. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry, folks. Game Time has it all. What are you waiting for? Go and download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed with Game Time. And just like that, everybody, we are back thriving and sort of vibing here into the second segment of this here podcast. Remember, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from. Follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno. Continuing on, guys. The other big question, obviously, for this offseason is the free agency class, and specifically replacing Joe Musgrove. And I think that there's two interesting avenues for replacing Joe Musgrove. And by replace, I mean like the value. I don't mean like they're getting rid of him and he's gone or anything like that. It's just that he is gone for this next season and will return hopefully at some point, like a month and a half or two into the 2026 season. It reminds me a little bit like Walker Buehler. And again, with the injury to Joe Musgrove, it's not like it's a guarantee that he'll be back better than ever, right? Like, especially like it's just a little, throw that out there. Speaking of Walker Buehler, and speaking of Walker Buehler, again, two reasons to speak of him. The free agency class is one avenue in which the Padres could potentially replace or at least find some value to make up for the loss of Joe Musgrove, to put it nicely. And there are a lot, and I'm just going to name some, all right? You've got Corbin Burnes. He's a free agent. Garrett Cole can opt out. He won't, though. Blake Snell, he can opt out. I think he will. Yusei Kikuchi, Michael Wacha has a player option. I don't know if he'll take that, actually. I'm not totally sure. I haven't been following the Royals land exactly. Freddie Peralta has a club option. They're probably taking that. Max Fried, Nate Eovaldi, Jack Flaherty, our boy, Nick Martinez, our boy, Jordan Montgomery has a player option. Kyle Gibson has a player option. Justin Verlander, Nick Pivetta is interesting. Sean Manaea can opt out, and especially with the season he's had, he's probably going to be someone that opts out. Merrill Kelly has a club option, so not him. Charlie Morton, Kyle Hendricks, Clayton Kershaw, whatever. Shane Bieber, Max Scherzer, Patrick Corbin, Jose Quintana, Michael Lorenzen, Mike Clevenger, Alex Cobb, Lance Lynn, Trevor Williams. Okay, I don't know why I'm naming every single player, but still Matthew Boyd, Luis Severino, Frankie Montas might be someone people might take a flyer on, the year after the year, maybe something like that. Wade Miley has low-key been really effective for a few years now as just like a back end guy. And then you've got guys that are interesting at the bottom. Your Robbie Rays, he can opt out potentially. And I think I don't know if he will exactly. I don't know what's going on with the Giants. But if he opts out, that's an interesting name who, when healthy, he was at least a solid, number 3 sort of starter that can give you some strikeouts. Walker Buehler, of course, is available. He's going to be an interesting one that probably signs for some sort of 1 year, 1-1, like 1 year and a player option year, some similar to what Rhys Hoskins did this season. So I'd be interested in that. What else we got here? Michael Soroka, if you believe in the reclamation project, there you go. But all in all, it's not like the most stacked starting pitcher market in the world, but it's at least interesting. And there are at least some players also, by the way, this isn't taking into account starting pitchers that might get traded, right? Like, we don't know exactly who is available just yet, which is one of the most exciting things about sports in general, is like guys you don't realize are available just because they haven't necessarily hit the rumor mill just yet. But they really definitely are. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe even the Mariners quietly are like, we need to trade and like maybe get some hitters in return. I don't think the Padres would be a good match for that because they don't have the farm system depth anymore. I think that the Orioles, in terms of Corbin Burnes, are at least going to be incentivized to keep him now that they have new ownership. But again, this is all whatever, guys, because there's also some other guys out there, right? Garrett Crochet, he might be a guy that gets traded this offseason. That's someone to look out for. And the Padres are reportedly really interested in him to start. So look at him, and Lord knows that the White Sox are just in a really bad shape right now. So I wouldn't be surprised by that. Eric Feed, that's another one of the White Sox. In terms of batters, Luis Robert, like there are players that are not being talked about right now that could absolutely become available and that we're not even really thinking of. And that's exciting, man. I love that. I love that so much. Astros, right? Astros are probably losing Alex Bregman, who's a free agent this offseason. And you look at their team and you're like, oh man, I don't know. You're losing Bregman. Your pitching's getting older. I wouldn't be totally shocked if they decide maybe we have to start entering a little bit of a rebuild. So again, we don't know fully, but those are just some names. I think Max Fried would be hilarious if they're able to get him. I just think that would be super awesome. Jack Flaherty, before he became an enemy of the Padres and their fan base, was definitely an interesting one at 29 years old. He's probably the youngest of all the top tier pitching options available. Jordan Montgomery is another one. That guy, I know he had a bad year, like he really did, and the ownership group, the way that they talked about him makes me think he's going to like decline that player option and get the heck out of there. I don't know for sure, because I do think that there is a team out there that's going to be like, you know what, you signed late and it was weird. We believe in you to be a back end solid starter or something like that. We'll have to see. Will he take it? I assume he'll probably take it. We'll have to see, but it depends on how the market goes. And in my opinion, there's never a shortage of need at starting pitchers. So these guys, most of the time, I think will opt out. Garrett Cole being an exception because I think he gets like 37 million or something crazy like that, right? Like that'd be insane if he opted out. Like that's not happening. But anyway, that's just a little bit of a breakdown, guys. And then those are just the free agents and just some ideas for trades. And then, in my opinion, one of the even more fascinating things that is not being talked about yet, it's been only rumored just a tiny bit, You have to like really crawl and like really scrape under the woodwork in order to find this rumor, but here it is, folks. Roki Sasaki. And when you Google him, you'll probably hear that there's been rumors that he's not going to get posted this winter. But I'm just saying it's not a guarantee, unlike the free agents and some of the train targets I was mentioning, but it's possible he does. And if that's the case, you're looking at a pitcher that the Padres, that would kind of be one of their dream outcomes because they probably would not have to spend nearly as much acquiring him as your Snells and your Max Frieds, guys of that nature, as much as Roki Sasaki. And Roki Sasaki at just 23 years old, this guy has had, I mean, he throws super hard. I'm not saying it's quite like on the level of a Yamamoto. I think Yamamoto is like a genuine like freak of nature, but I do think that overall the upside for this guy, from everyone I know and trust, Arm Layton, who's been on the show before, he's like, this guy, man, like you got a preview of him in the World Baseball Classic, right? Like you got a preview of him before. Everyone's been talking about him before, but it's a little bit unknown whether or not he's going to get posted. If he does, hey, all I know is AJ Preller name dropped this dude not too long ago. If you follow Giannis Antetokounmpo on Twitter, he tweeted out, by the way, today, like refreshing everyone's memory about this, that Preller mentions, like, you know, the future with guys like Ethan Salas and maybe some, you know, guys down the line. And he brings up, you know, what you're seeing internationally, like Roki Sasaki. Preller's a very smart man. I don't know, but is this dumb what I'm doing? Yes, but I'm 100% reading into the fact that he brought up Roki Sasaki. Like, I understand he's a very famous player and everyone's going to be talking to him, but I'm absolutely looking into it, and they have signed a lot of international free agents before, so it wouldn't shock me if the Padres are absolutely in talks and absolutely keeping an eye on it. So just wait for that. We're probably going to hear about that relatively soon, maybe in the next month or so. Like, we're going to get more confirmation as to whether or not Roki Sasaki will be posted. It's a little bit flimsy. I don't really have any inside sources on that, like, at all. But if he does, which would be really exciting, that's one of the top tier pitchers available on the market, especially at his age. So that's an interesting one, and definitely keep an eye on it for someone who could replace Musgrove. But of course, that's not it, guys. Another question for the offseason is whether or not the Padres bring back Hae-Seong Kim. In my opinion, the answer is a heck no. Not just because I don't think the team wants to, because of how much other needs I think they need to address, and the fact that they do have some guys that they could potentially fill in for that position, and not to mention that he is getting surgery. But also me personally, I'm just not with it, because I think on top of the fact that you can move Bogaerts to short, you can move Cronenworth back to second where he belongs. You could have Vries at first base, or if you have Vries at DH, maybe you can go out and get yourself a Christian Walker. Maybe, I don't know. That could be an interesting guy to look into. I would not be opposed to having a really Gold Glove defensive first baseman there, and then Vries at DH. I could totally see that. I think that just makes more sense, and not to mention, Hae-Seong Kim's probably going to be a multi-year deal. You probably don't want to block the rest of your. You probably don't want to block your prospect, Leodalis Vries, who is a shortstop prospect. And when that guy's ready, he might be special. You're going to want to call him up, right? You're going to want to do that. So that's something to keep an eye on. But me personally, I do not think that they are going to re-sign him. And they might have learned their lesson with the fact that they had extended Jake Cronenworth, who is a platoon, not a platoon, a utility type of player who can play across multiple positions, be a decent offensive player. Kim, the better defender, obviously. But I don't see it. It stinks because the vibes are good with him. I miss him. He was really missing this postseason, wasn't he? He was missing for the last bunch of the season, too, in general. Like, I miss that dude, man. Oh, Hae-Seong Kim, I love him so much. I miss him, but that is another question, but it is a relatively minor one. Then there's three other things that I think the Padres need to keep an eye on, and the three other things that you need to keep an eye on for this off season. And we're going to talk about them in just a minute, guys. But first, I must talk to you about longtime sponsor of the podcast, FanDuel. Baseball season may be over, but baby, we still got plenty of other sports. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, or NHL fans, or WNBA fans, or NBA fans, whatever you are, they've got you at America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Got the World Series going on too? Don't want to miss out on the action. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. And just like that, everybody, we are thriving and vibing into the last segment of this year's show with some of the things to keep an eye on for this offseason. It's a bunch of them, man. Lastly, we just talked about Hae-Seong Kim. In terms of the last three, I think that they're really important. First of all, and speaking of before, this kind of ties into what we were saying with the money thing. And in terms of whether or not they have money to spend, money to go around, how much is going to be available exactly, what exactly is going to be the budget. If there's one thing that portends of like a lot incoming, is that reportedly, according to Dennis Lin of The Athletic, Jackson Merrill and Padres discussed an extension. Now this, again, this was at one point, right? And we don't know exactly how recent this has been. Go check out the rest of his breakdown over The Athletic. He does a great job. But I think this is a really good sign. But still, does Jackson Merrill get extended? And I think that he had the type of season in which he very well could get extended. Am I in favor of it? Not necessarily, because I think that this is a team that's already spending a lot of money, and there's no reason to kind of put yourself in a corner already when it's not guaranteed. And especially with what we've seen over the last few years, it's not like this team has been consistently solid and good, so you don't want to like overcommit and whatnot, and just not have any flexibility with your lineup to change should Jackson Merrill come out and get exploited by the lefty matchups. Although, frankly, I don't think it's that bad, right? And also, he's a 21-year-old. Like, I'm not worried about the lefty thing too much. We'll see next year. But extending him, do you get him on like some Michael Harris type of deal? Michael Harris would be the comp, right? Michael Harris would be the comp. And if you guys are curious for what Michael Harris received from the Atlanta Braves, it was a very team-friendly sort of deal for a guy who has tremendous upside. He was the Rookie of the Year when he played. Of course, he unfortunately, didn't have to deal with the Paul Skeens phenomenon. That's why he got it. But he's getting about $8 million a year. His deal was 8 years, $72 million. I think Jackson Merrill will go for a little bit more than that, because that's just usually how the market goes. I wouldn't hate it, but I'm just saying it's not something that I think that the Padres need to make a priority one, right? Because they still have the control. And unlike other teams who like to manipulate and they keep their guys forever and then they never sign them and guys hate arbitration, I can imagine that the Padres will work something out. And at the very minimum, the Padres are known for not going to arbitration hearings. They've settled everything with their players. They have a really good relationship with them. That's good. But even still, a thing to keep an eye on, as Dennis Lin writes for The Athletic. Next up is the Xander Bogaerts problem, guys. This is the most depressing one. And we're going to do player reviews. I mentioned this on yesterday's show. One of the things we have planned for the next coming weeks is player reviews, reviewing every single player, their whole season, doing some breakdowns, maybe even doing some highlights and biggest moments and lowest moments. Xander Bogaerts is one that we're definitely going to be talking about. And there is a problem with Xander Bogaerts, and he's the reason why I would be very careful to go all in and make sure, because the Xander Bogaerts thing is scary. On top of being just not very good this year, compared to last year, when he really showed that he had a drop off after getting his wrist hurt, but then not immediately, but as time went on, he then started raking at the end of the year. This year, he's basically bad the whole time. He had an expected weighted on base of 306, which is bad and doesn't portend of great luck going forward. And his hard hit rate has declined every single year since 2021. 43 to 39.5 to 34.6 to 33.2. Also, his walk rate has declined every year since 2021. 10.3% to 9% to 8.4 to just a measly 6% this year. Everything about him. And again, if you want to say, oh, well, it was just one bad season. He's had now, over the past few years, some really big discrepancies in his weighted on base and his expected weighted on base. In 2022, he had a 363, expected of 323. Last year, 343, expected of 318. So maybe what we got this year is actually Xander Bogaerts' luck finally ran out, and that's scary. And I don't know exactly what they're going to do in that situation. I'm hoping they can fix it, right? We've seen some players be a mess before. Carlos Correa is a great comparison. That guy was great this year when he was healthy, and he looked like he was absolutely in shambles that first year of the contract. Like, it looked really, really bad, and then they fixed it and everything was okay. But man, I am not excited about that. It is a huge problem and something that we're going to be watching throughout the offseason, whether or not this improves, where they're going to put him. He can at least play a good defense, I think, at second base or shortstop. I think he could be pretty solid. But man, the Xander Bogaerts thing is huge, and whether or not that impacts the moves that the Padres make, whether or not that means that this team is not going to be as bullish in the offseason and giving out multi-year deals remains to be seen, right? But all I know is the Xander Bogaerts thing, oh boy, it is rough. And before anyone sends me messages about like, just, we got to trade him, it's like, yeah, nobody wants him, guys. We gave him an 11-year contract, and I think the next closest team was giving him like a 7-year deal. It's not great. This might be the new Hosmer, at least in terms of on-field. I have not had an issue in terms of all those many other reasons why we couldn't stand Eric Hosmer. But anyway, that is a big question. And then the last question, I think, in terms of just right now, what I'm thinking of is Ethan Salas and Leodalis Vries. There was a report from MLB Trade Rumors today in which they talked about a bunch of things, including Profar and Higashioka and all sorts of Padres stuff. But I'm going to read you a passage. With Higashioka potentially in line for a hefty raise this winter, AC suggests that Kevin Acee, of course, the San Diego Tribune, that San Diego Brass could instead look to part ways with both him and Kim this winter as they wait for the impending arrival of the club's top prospects. Catcher Ethan Salas entered the 2024 season as a consensus top 10 prospect in baseball after reaching the AA level as a 17-year-old, but AC notes that shortstop prospect Leodalis Vries, who turned 18 just 2 days ago, is even more highly regarded by Padres brass. What's more, AC notes that there have been discussions within the organization about the possibility of both teenage phenoms making their big league debuts as soon as 2025. If the Padres truly believe both players could be ready for the majors sometime next year, that could incentivize them to focus on other areas of the roster this winter and stick to relatively short-term options behind the plate and at shortstop who could be pushed aside in the event that Salas or DeVries cracks the big league roster. Wow. That is a bombshell. Here's the thing. It's still early. That's the fun part about doing this podcast. It's still very early, but we've seen them do this before. If this is something you heard from nearly every team, you could take it with a grain of salt. But this is a team and management that has been very bullish on promoting guys. And it's been mixed results, right? You've seen the way Luis Campusano was handled. That was bad. You saw the way that CJ Abrams was handled. That was bad. But then you had Fernando Tatis Jr. You had Jackson Merrill. And even to a degree, sort of, you had Mackenzie Gore, who was at least really helpful for the team in 2022 until the trade deadline, right? So this is really this is some crazy stuff, man. If they make it that this kid at 18 years old is coming up, that's like unheard of. I'm at least not buying Salas. That I just don't think he's ready. I really, really don't. I think a lot of Salas's ranking is based on potential, while DeVries is based on potential and some of the results that we've seen on field. And I think that that's the difference between the two of them. But overall, I don't see what they're hoping to get out of this. I don't understand the idea that Ethan Salas is going to come up and be a phenomenal catcher for a team that's looking to make the playoffs, by the way. Like, this isn't some rebuilding team that needs to sell tickets. Like, I can't see a way in which they do this, right? I don't see it, but it's still something to keep an eye on. I don't think these guys are going to get traded. I think there's a reason they didn't move them at the deadline, even though they probably could have for some big-time players, especially pitchers. But it's something this is new. I added this last second before I started recording. It's new, but nonetheless, Kevin Acee is usually pretty on point in a lot of things regarding the Padres management, despite the fact that he gets some crap on Twitter. So really excited to see how this turns out, but I am very against it. I do not think that they need to do this. At least like Salas, I get why they're like scared because of the fact that they currently have like Elias Diaz and, Campusano's a mess. That tells you what they think of Campusano, by the way. The fact that they're thinking of trying to call up an 18-year-old. And DeVries, I'm like, yeah, he might be better off right now and look a little bit better and look more like you see it already. But he's also still super young and also a shortstop. Like, we already have Bogaerts and we have, Jake Cronenworth. Like, he can move to second base in exchange. So I don't really see it, but nonetheless, gotta wait, see how that turns out. And those are kind of the biggest storylines for the Padres as of right now, in terms of the offseason. I'm really excited. Eventually, I'll give my offseason wish list where we're actually like literally in the offseason, the World Series is done. But let me tell you, it's going to be fun, man. It's going to be fun. It's always fun as a Padres fan to follow the offseason. It's always fun to see what they come up with, but that's it. What's the money going to look like? How Xander Bogaerts is going to be handled? Who's the replacement for Joe Musgrove? Is Roki Sasaki going to be posted? Are they going to call up Leodalis, Vries, and Ethan Salas? Are they going to be happy and lovely, folks? That is the question. Will they extend Jackson Merrill? All sort of stuff, guys. And if you want the latest updates on all those things as we head into the offseason, of course, keep it here on Locked On Padres, guys. Follow me on Twitter at JAVIIPENO, where I've been apparently reaching Dodgers fans accidentally lately. So you can check that out and go check out the show at LO_Padres or some of my other work at Just Baseball and Baseball versus the World. But for now, that about does it, everybody. Until next time, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.